So before we get into the presentation, Laura, Christine, and Claire will be talking during some of the slides, but first I'll kind of hand it over to them so they can talk about their agency and position. So Laura, Christine, and Claire, if you don't mind in that order, sharing your information.
Sure. Good morning, everyone. I'm Maura Tumulty. I'm the Associate Director with Montgomery County Mobile Crisis and the Teen and Peer Support Talk Lines. So we're a free service to anyone in Montgomery County who's physically in the county. And I will talk more during those slides about the support that we offer.
All right, I'm Christine Stutman. I'm the Executive Director of NAMI, which is National Alliance on Mental Illness. We provide education, support, and advocacy for anybody in Montgomery County. It's also free services. We have a host of support groups throughout the county that are run in different areas of the county, the libraries and so forth. And then we also do some advocacy work with legislators. And then we also do some work in the schools, educating folks around mental illness.
Thanks, Christine. Hi, my name is Claire Higgins. I'm the program director for the family teams at HopeWorks. HopeWorks is a local nonprofit organization. It is peer-led, which means that the vast majority of the folks who work at HopeWorks and is including their board are folks who either have experienced navigating the mental health systems for themselves or helping to navigate the child serving systems for their child or children. All of our services are provided at no cost to families. And I myself do the work because I am the mother of 8 children, several of whom have had to navigate the various behavioral health systems, as well as other things like intellectual disability and that kind of thing. So all of the folks who work on our family teams are parents of children who have navigated the various child serving systems. And we provide a bunch of different support to families, which can include any of the child serving systems. We can help them walk through IEP meetings, get connected to resources, support them through juvenile justice or truancy issues. It's really at whatever the parent needs is how we help those families. And I'll talk a little bit more about that as we go on too. Thanks, Charlene.
Thanks, everybody. So just to give a little bit of an overview of Montgomery County, my office, the Office of Mental Health, our offices were administrative, the Office of Mental Health, Drug and Alcohol Managed Care Solutions. We are contract holders. So many of the services that I'm going to talk about are either directly funded and we contract with providers to provide these services, or in the case of Office of Managed Care Solutions, that's one that's not typically talked about so much, that office. They hold a contract with Magellan Behavioral Health, who's the behavioral health managed care organization for Montgomery County. And so they are the provider for a lot of those clinical services through Health Choices medical assistance dollars. Just an overview, right, of guiding principles. This is kind of what orients our care and how we approach the community. I think the ones that are the most important that stand out, right, are all the services are delivered in a trauma-informed manner. They're individualized. We always want to think about where services can be delivered in the person's home and community as like the least restrictive environment. And of course, just that inclusion of community voice, whether it's, family's voice. We want to know what the needs are and how things are going. Just to kick off with access to care. So in Pennsylvania, if a child has any type of developmental disability, diagnosed emotional needs, behavioral health disorders, or medical conditions, a family is eligible to apply for medical assistance based on just the diagnosis and not the family income. So when a child is eligible for medical assistance and the family applies, what that does, if they're approved, is it kind of open the doors in terms of which kinds of services are available. There's a lot of services that are community-based that can go into the home or the school that are not funded through commercial or private insurance, and they're only available through medical assistance. So if anybody is interested, if families are interested in applying, that would happen through the state. There's a Montgomery County Assistance Office. There's one located in Norristown and Pottstown. You can apply online through the Compass website. And I'm also going to acknowledge sometimes those applications feel very overwhelming. So in a few slides, I'm going to talk about administrative case management, which is a service that's available to help families through that application process. Also noting, because I'm just trying to address some of the questions that came in with registration. If your child does not have a formal diagnosis, sometimes a pediatrician is a really good place to start, or an evaluation through the mental health system with either a psychologist or psychiatrist. There are times that the evaluation reports or IEPs can substantiate disability, but sometimes because they're so educationally focused, the state will kind of ask more questions and ask for further documentation, so that it doesn't always get approved based on the ERs and the IEPs. Some really good guides around application and medical assistance, and you'll get this presentation, these links are live, are the medical assistance eligibility handbook. So there's some state resources, and then also the Health Law Project has some really great guides just that break down the application process and eligibility. Another thing that I want to highlight too, and this started, well, it's like a year, April 2023, that because of the end of the health emergency with the pandemic, there is a break where people did not have to reapply and renew for their benefits for medical assistance or CHIP on an annual basis. It's time that we're starting to have to renew and apply again. So if you're getting any type of communication around that renewal, please take a look at that. If you need help with it, the administrative case managers, which I'll talk about, can be a resource, but that is something that will have to be completed annually. Some questions about that, we can definitely talk more about that towards the end of the presentation. Just to kind of also give an overview, right, of like how the funds work and how the medical assistance is paid for. So essentially, Magellan Behavioral Health, every county can contract with a behavioral health managed care organization. Montgomery County contracts with Magellan. So how Magellan fits in is that through the PA Department of Human Services, they fund the Health Choice program. So that provides physical health care and behavioral health care. So that money is given to county for the behavioral health services, and we contract with Magellan. So neighboring counties may or may not contract with Magellan, but those same, for the most part, the same scope of services are available. And then if you have any questions about Magellan or just want to learn more about them as a contracted entity, there's some contact information there. All right, and then I'm going to pause, and Claire is going to talk a little bit about Act 65.
Thanks, Charlene. So for those of you who don't know, there is Act 65 of 2020 was clarification to a prior law which spoke to mental health consent for minors. In Pennsylvania, youth ages 14 to 17 can consent to inpatient or outpatient treatment on their own without their parental consent. So that means if you have a young person who is 14 or over and they want to get either counseling or they feel like they need to go to a higher level of care, like an inpatient facility, they can consent to that treatment and they do not need their parents' consent in order to do so. The law was created originally to protect children who wanted to get support and whose parents were not in agreement with that. Over time, the law has come to be a little bit misinterpreted, and you may have heard, if any of you have children who are in the behavioral health world, that once a child turns 14, they get to make all of their decisions and parents don't have any input. But actually, that is not true. Although Act 65 does allow children and youth to consent to their treatment over 14, it also still allows parents to consent to that treatment, even if the child does not agree to it. The tricky part is obviously if a parent agrees to something like outpatient for their children and the children refuse to go, the law does not force them to go, but parents can consent and minors can consent without the agreement of the other, and one can't override the other. It's a little bit more complicated. If a parent wants a child to go to an inpatient facility, that recommendation has to come in conjunction with the recommendation of a licensed doctor who has determined that that level of care is required. For outpatient therapies and lower levels of care, the parent can consent without the recommendation of a doctor. The other piece of this that is important to know for those of you who may be navigating this system is that consent is, whoever provides the consent then controls the records. So if you have a child who is consented to treatment, then that child controls the records, the release of records and those kinds of things. Parents can always ask to also sign consent, even if the child has consented to treatment. The one place that this can get kind of tricky with providers is sometimes when children are presented something like an emergency room in a crisis situation, the hospital may not know that the parent can also consent, and they may recommend what they call a 302, which is an involuntary commitment for children. It's important to know that that should never have to be a thing, because even if if a doctor feels it's necessary and the parent feels it's necessary, the parent can still consent until the child is 18. And then in terms of, and I also want to make clear that this doesn't mean that if you consent to treatment, you have access to all of your child's information. There are still some things that are protected under the privacy of a therapist relationship and that kind of thing. However, those mental health records can be released by whomever provided that consent. For children 14 to 18, parents can only have those records released to another medical party. So it's not like the parent could say, I want all of my child's medical records, unless the child consents. Unless the child consents to that. Sorry, bad dogs. But they could have those records released to another entity, like another medical entity. It's a very complicated process. I do have a flow chart which kind of shows all the different options that we can send along with this presentation after it's over. And if there are any questions, particularly around Act 65, we can also answer those at the end of the presentation.
Thanks for that, Claire. You do such a nice job, like succinctly explaining that. It's a lot of information. All right, so just rolling into more resources that are available and how our county is organized. So there are 6 community behavioral health centers, CBHCs is the acronym. They're all regionally located throughout the county. There's freedom of choice to, just because one is in your area, you do not necessarily have to use that particular agency. But they are important because they are hubs of providing various levels of care. So they can provide assessment, case management services, treatment, and medication management. The only one, so the Abington region is covered by Child and Family Focus. In the adult world, that region is supported by Central. What's nice about the CBHCs is, again, they have that full continuum. Most of them, some of them accept private insurance, they all accept medical assistance, but they also have county funding available for anyone who's underinsured or non-insured. And so if there's any type of issue with not having insurance, a family is absolutely able to talk with their community behavioral health center about exploring funding, because we just want to support access to care. Okay. And now we're going to roll into children's behavioral health services. So Maura, if you don't mind talking about mobile crisis.
I'd be happy to. So Montgomery County Mobile Crisis, we are a free service to anyone physically in Montgomery County. Doesn't matter what insurance you have. And we are 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, you get a human. And so we are based in Plymouth Meeting. We have satellite offices throughout the county as well, to have a rapid response as quickly as possible to the different areas of the county. We offer telephone, telehealth, and mobile support, so we can come out to the home. I always like to say, I think there's a lot of stigma with the word crisis, and I wish I could change the name to Mobile Crappy Day Service, because we want to get involved before you're even in crisis and just get involved on those hard days with your children and your families. And what that looks like is really we want to help build insight and stabilize those immediate crisis situations and build insight to the cycle of crisis. And so coming up with a crisis plan for the family, helping them navigate some of those resources that Charlene's been talking about and getting connected to supports, including the ones that Claire and Christine are going to talk about as well. So both, peer supports, professional clinical supports, and natural supports, and strengthening all of those things. So we can respond to schools, homes, wherever the crisis is, and really support too during or after a hospitalization. So supporting that transition back into the community as well, and really being able to support individuals and families through those difficult times.
Thanks for that, Maura.
Mhm.
And then I'm going to roll in. Maura will be back with us. We're going to talk about Teen Chatline later, but right now we'll talk about our continuum of care. And this presentation will not go through the full continuum of care, just really because of time. But just acknowledging that in the children's world, we have outpatient services, intensive behavioral health services, which are more behaviorally focused, and I'm also acknowledging staffing issues. I really should acknowledge the staffing issues for all the levels of care, not just IVHS. So I'll talk about that in a little bit. But some in-home services, family-based and multi-systemic therapy, those are kind of services for the higher risk situations up through partial hospitalization in residential or acute inpatient. If you have any questions about these, my contact information will be at the end of the presentation, or we'll have time for questions. So please, let's talk. I do want to highlight specifically case management services. So administrative case management, ACM, this is a county funded service that's connected with all of the community behavioral health centers, the CBHCs. And the ACMs are awesome because they're kind of like touch points to get an idea of what resources might be available for whatever your need is in the community, in your region, but then also for the medical assistance applications, where they can just be a support for a family who's going through that application process. That can feel a little cumbersome, especially if they're feeling like they're in a crisis mode or just a high energy situation. ACMs are really helpful too if you're just, trying to find a camp that might be local and have, financial assistance available, or willing to work with an IVHS provider, like on a cooperative level. ACMs can help with that. So that's more of a short-term. Blended case management, BCM, is the more long-term type case management service for families or kids who have medical assistance and diagnosis, and they're able to kind of maintain that service for a more ongoing, longer-term basis. And the BCMs can help with partnership around educational status, social support, finding, other opportunities like social opportunities in an area where a kid might be interested. There was a question around transitional age youth services. So I want to point out to the Transition to Independence Program TIP. That is available through Central Behavioral Health, which is one of those CBHCs in the Norristown area, but they serve the entire county. And that's an empirically supported program for young people who are between the ages of 16 to 26. So that transitional age span, who have medical assistance in a diagnosis. And what's really nice about that is they really specialize in working with that transition age population. So the 5 domains that they'll help kind of plan around are educational opportunities, living situation, employment and career, community life functioning, and personal effectiveness and well-being. They also have the flexibility to meet in homes or community. So if anybody's looking very specifically for transition age support, case management TIP is where to go. Another transition age service that's available, it's a little bit different than case management. It actually falls under certified peer support. It's called TAY-CPS, Transitional Age Youth Certified Peer Specialist. That is through Child and Family Focus, again, open to the entire county. But CPSs are individuals who have their own lived experience, and they're trained and able to share their own stories of recovery and resiliency as a way to kind of help support, the person that they're working with. That is available for kids and transitional age youth who between the ages of 14 to 26, and also requires a medical assistance and diagnosis. I'm going to send a behavioral health guide out as part of the package of this, and KIP and K CPS will be in that guide. Another newer service that's available that I wanted to highlight, and this is like through Child and Family Focus, but available to the entire county, is their Nurse Navigator program. And this is just unique because it supports youth ages 12 to 18 who have both a physical health and a behavioral health need, or if they're at risk for a physical health issue. So at risk for asthma or diabetes or just something else that's happening. And the Nurse Navigator, the goal here is to just reduce gaps in care, and to help families kind of organize both systems, right? It's a lot to have to organize behavioral health care and physical health care. So they're reducing those gaps in care and supporting that coordination between providers. So an example is, some medication, it's hard to come by, there's shortages. So the Nurse Navigator would be able to help a family identify a pharmacy that has a medication that they're looking for, to help reduce any issue with access to medication. And that is one that requires medical assistance as well. All right, we'll move into other supports that are funded through the county. So the Student Assistance Program, Office of Mental Health partners with the Office of Drug and Alcohol just to provide funding to 4 providers who can then serve all the districts in Montgomery County. Student Assistance Program, SAP, it's a mandatory process through the state. So schools have SAP teams, so it's a non-punitive way for referrals to be made if there's any type of mental health or drug and alcohol related issues that are impeding on the child reaching their full learning potential. Then, through the county funded SAP support, the providers are able to provide behavioral health screenings. So that's an opportunity. There's a short screening that takes a look at risk factors around depression, anxiety, substance use, eating disorder, suicidal ideation, just to get an idea of like what some of the stressors might be. They also are having a conversation with the child and the family, and then from there can make recommendations for what's available throughout the county to support. They can also provide some short-term in-school opportunities. So for example, they can provide short-term, it's called mental health up to 3 hours of one-on-one support of like psychoeducational skill building, or groups for students who have similar needs. I will say parent permission is needed for all of the participation in SAP services. And also, if there's anything that's needed beyond SAP, because SAP is really meant to be the bridge, that provider would be able to help make those community connections. And those are all regionally located as well. So our providers are Aldersgate, Carson Valley, Creative Health, and Marikey. And what SAP looks like, it might vary building to building too, just because every district has a different kind of continuum of what's available, either through their own resources or, other contracted entities in the building. All right. And now I'm gonna turn it back over to Maura to talk about Teen Talk Line.
Sure. So the Teen Talk Line is open 7 days a week from 1 to 9. It's a warm line for youth to talk about things with someone their own age. They can either call with the 866 number there or text. The teens often prefer texting over calling and talking. So you can talk about anything. Calls are private and anonymous if they want to. They are really connected to mobile crisis. So if there is any concern, that does get transitioned over. Also, teens can volunteer on this. So they're trained in like motivational interviewing, and there's a supervisor to make sure that there isn't, the subject matter isn't too heavy, or if it does need to get transferred to crisis as well. But it's both an opportunity for teens to have a place to volunteer and give back, or to use for themselves. And there's a great opportunity if they do volunteer to connect with teens from other schools, because there's volunteers from all over, and they do host some of that virtually as well. And there's involvement from some of the supervisors are younger certified peer specialists, so individuals with lived experience as well. So really it can be a nice outlet if they're not open for therapy, or there's some drama with friends or things like that, to have a space to talk to someone their own age who really gets it, without being judgmental.
Thanks, Laura. And you mentioned kind of the peer issues that are a reason kids call, but can you just talk a little bit about some of the themes that you see?
Sure. I would say some of stress around school, academics, family, home, unfortunately, bullying. So really there's no reason, any reason people can reach out, and teens can use this support. Relationship issues, drama, really everything and anything. But those are some of the major themes we see.
All right, and I'm gonna now pass it over to Claire to talk about Family Works and then the IEP support.
Thanks, Charlene. So I just want to acknowledge to everybody that we are throwing so much information at you. And imagine for just 1 second that you're a parent who is new to the systems or has multiple system involvement and is really trying to just keep your kids and your family safe at home. And then you start to hear all of this information. It can be incredibly overwhelming. So really, if you remember nothing else about Family Works, we are the folks who can help bring that all together for you. We have all been through it ourselves. We know how overwhelming this is. And our job is to help you walk through all of this side by side as someone who's been there. Like I said earlier, we are a program that is offered at no cost to families in Montgomery County. You do not need to have any kind of diagnosis for your child. You don't have to have any particular insurance. We can work in conjunction with all of the other services and in fact end up doing that quite often. We work primarily with the parents. So a lot of the other services, there's like, the way it works is there's one child who has medical assistance and that child is identified as the child that the folks are supporting. We work with the parents. So we can work with parents of one child and then also support them with another child in the family. We are not a time limited service. We are not anything like, with some of the other clinical services, there are regulations where you have to meet with someone once a week for 15 minutes or they can't be on your caseload any longer. We really work with the parents as they need us. We can communicate with them via text or email or in person or via phone. And what we do is really limitless. I mean, it's hard to describe what we do because really what we do is we meet with a family and find out what their needs are, and then we support them in whatever way they might need. So we have some families, for example, who are just starting out and they might have kids who are getting kicked out of preschool and they don't know how to connect to services around that, all the way up to children who are, transitioning out of the child serving systems and into the adult world, or kids who have involvement with juvenile justice and the Office of Children and Youth, and also education. So really, like, we run the whole gamut. Our family peers are, in addition to having that lived experience, they are very well trained in terms of all of the child serving systems. I would say a lot of the work that we do, probably about 30 to 40% of the work that we do revolves in some way around schools and IEPs and getting them emotional support, and building bridges. So a lot of times when families come to us, they're really frustrated with the systems. They feel like they haven't made any progress. And we work collaboratively with all the systems involved to kind of help build those bridges. And help get them, help the families recognize that they're an important part of the team, help the teams recognize that they are, the families are, their voice is important. And then also something that we talk about a lot is truth telling with love. So we build that relationship with the family so that we can also really help set expectations for them, help them understand what services can and can't do, and then help them see things from a different perspective. So sometimes, we've had families go into an IEP meeting and come out and say, "Oh my gosh, can you believe how that went?" And we might say, "Yeah, that was great." And they're like, "No, no, no, it wasn't great." So from having the second set of ears and another perspective in the room and having that space to process afterwards can sometimes help families to understand things from a different perspective And it can help the providers or the schools to sort of lower the temperature in the room so things are maybe a little bit less combative. So sometimes it feels, my team sometimes feels like they don't do anything because they may just be in a meeting taking notes and sitting with the family, but just having that extra person with you who can help walk you through it is really, really helpful. We also have support groups that we host that are virtual twice a month. And they either are a mutual aid support group where families get together and kind of lead the discussion themselves, or we also have sometimes a speaker series where families can come in and learn. We did a training on Act 65. This week's support group is about wellness and self-care. Those are open to any family, anywhere. It's not just Montgomery County, and it's not just the families that we're serving. So if you're interested in learning more about Family Works and what we do, you can contact us. The referral process is super easy. We just ask that, families are willing to do it. It's a voluntary service only. And we just will have someone reach out to the family, gather a little bit of demographic information, and then get started just with a discussion about where they are and what they need help with. I think the majority of the folks who work for us, actually, I know all the folks who work for us, came to this work because they felt really lost and overwhelmed and alone when they were navigating the systems for their own children. And once they got to a point where they were able to kind of get through it and be at the other end and be able to provide hope and inspiration for other families, they said, this is what I want to do. I want to be able to pay back to families who felt also alone. There are so many amazing services in Montgomery County, but when you're in the thick of things, sometimes it's hard to access them or remember them or find them or believe in them. So really, that's kind of the work that we do. I think that about sums it up.
Sorry if I missed Claire. Did you talk about the support groups? Because I was addressing some chat stuff.
Yeah, I did talk about the support group.
Thank you. All right, thank you for that. Sorry. Okay, and then next up, Christine is going to talk a little bit about NAMI.
Hi. Yeah, so I talked a little bit earlier about an overview of what we do. Just for everyone, just again, NAMI is National Alliance on Mental Illness. We provide a myriad of support groups throughout the county. These are all free of service. All of our services are free. We have support groups as specific as anxiety groups for Black and Brown women to more general as family support groups. And so I'll send out some information to Charlene later about sort of all the groups that we offer. But one of the things that I wanted to highlight is a new group that we're trying to get off the ground. We did get one of our staff trained and we're looking to try to train somebody else, but it's called NAMI Basics. And NAMI Basics is really geared towards folks who have cared for somebody who has had some kind of mental illness or issue that they've dealt with before the age of 14. And this group is really designed to help those caregivers in navigating, the system, the school system, and then also just sort of the mental health issues. And so we're hoping to get that off the ground soon. So you can let me know if you're interested in that. And like I said, we're also looking for other people to train so that they can be part of this, facilitating this group. We also provide education in the schools. Right now we're doing a program called Ending the Silence, and we're in many area middle schools and high schools. This is a program where we talk about mental illness, sort of normalize that conversation for the kids in the school. And then we also talk with counselors and teachers as well while we're there. And then we always have somebody come with us who has actually dealt with this issue and, can talk to the kids about sort of what they've experienced. We've had a lot of kids come up afterwards and tell us how they're experiencing these issues. So I think we're really hitting the mark with that. And then the last thing that we do is our advocacy. I'm relatively new to NAMI, and so I've been developing relationships with area legislators. But my hope is that as we get the word out there, that people will come to us and tell us about their stories, and then hopefully we can meet with the legislators and pushing some of these agendas forward and creating laws that are more supportive to folks who are dealing with mental illness. And then one thing I wanted to mention too is we also operate a helpline that is run from 9 to 3, Monday through Friday. And people can call up with if they have questions, if they're needing support. We also, if there's a crisis, we also will link to crisis services. So yeah, those are all of our services. And again, like I said, I will follow up at the end with some electronic versions of all the things that I talked about so people can reach out if they have questions.
Thanks, Christine. This is a slide that just, talks about or shares some of the resources that are available. I did want to acknowledge, and I mentioned earlier, staffing and wait list. We're in a really interesting time right now, post-pandemic. I mean, definitely before pandemic, there were already some services that had wait lists or were harder to access. And I think we're starting to see systems changing a little bit, but as we know, system change takes time. So if you're running into any issues, please, our office is always happy to help if you're in a situation, especially as like a school staff or somebody who's working with a provider, and there's a very unique situation that you want to brainstorm. Our office is always happy to do that, to kind of think about creatively how to help support a situation. Another thing, that's a shift that's happening, which is it's a good thing. There's some funding available on the state budget that was available for schools for grants to help support, behavioral health needs. So what we're seeing is a shift in what's available in different systems. We're very, it's a new shift. So we'll kind of see how everything plays together and settles. But I think there's hope in terms of like the availability of services. I'm going to put our contact information. So if there's any questions that, you don't feel comfortable asking during this presentation, I think we'll offer the opportunity to go and breakout rooms later in one-on-one for questions. Please don't hesitate to get in contact with any of us. We want to help support. We know the systems can be really difficult and challenging sometimes to navigate, and just, acknowledge that. All right, I'm going to stop screen sharing. Before we go into questions, I am going to ask Claire, Christine, Maura, is there anything that you want to add that we didn't talk about in the presentation?
I just wanted to add one thing about our other program, which I usually talk about briefly, but we also have the state mandated survey teams, which this is anyone who's receiving those services that Charlene was talking about that are funded through Pennsylvania Health Choices, or for Montgomery County folks through Magellan. So things like IVHS or case management. We also run the survey teams that interview families about their experiences with those services. And I know that all of us are really surveyed out at this point, but the survey team does a really intentional job of talking to families about their experience, and those experiences go directly back to the providers. And the county actually has a process by which the providers are required to take feedback from families and integrate it into the way that they're delivering services. So if you receive an email or a phone call or a letter regarding a survey for some of those services, I just want you to know that it is something which is taken very seriously, and your feedback is thoroughly incorporated into the services, which is not something that we always have an opportunity to act on after we've received services. So if you see something that comes through from the family satisfaction team asking you to do a survey, we highly encourage you to do that.
Thanks, Claire. Maura, Christine, is there anything else that you want to add? Okay. So I've been keeping an eye on the chat. I don't think there's any questions that haven't been addressed. So we can open it up just if anybody has questions for the panel. Thinking maybe there's not, or I'll keep an eye in the chat for the rest of the meeting if you think of anything and you're marinating and have a question. Otherwise, just keep an eye out for the resources that'll come your way. We just appreciate your time.
All right, thank you. Lois, I think we can stop recording.